I have some thoughts on a subject that I thought I would share. So bear with me. I need a swig of coffee before I start. Um, Quite recently, I painted a little portrait of my mother who had passed away back in October of last year. And portraiture was something I hadn't been involved with for a wee while. And but I just felt it would be nice to sort of have this little memorial by way of a portrait. And so I gathered lots of photographs of her from different, stages in her life and tried to find a good one and, good image to work from and draw and whatever. Um, and I got up and running, and what I noticed, I when I got really into it and when it was all about actually measuring things carefully and really close observation and not because I wanted to get her eye the way it was. I wanted to get things right if possible. And so I became very aware of how intense my attention was to the images in front of me and the painting in front of me. But I also became very aware as I looked at the photographs, um, you know, of the intensity of emotion as well, in the sense that uh, when I really looked into my mother's eyes or her face uh, deeply, I noticed things, I obviously visually, but it took me to other places, to be engaged eye to eye with that person in a way, even though it wasn't real. Uh, Took me back to my childhood and took me to places of memory. And obviously that brings you to places of emotion as well. Um, and at first I found this a bit difficult because I thought it's gonna, maybe it's not the time to be doing this, but I pushed on with it and I got a portrait produced and all of that. But later on, I realized it wasn't a bad experience, really, because what it did was it added another layer to the painting, and the experience. In other words, it went beyond purely visual. It went beyond just, is that the right height of the nose and is the nose this color? And it went way beyond that because then, there were things I was trying to do in the painting. I realized with things like light to try and bring out certain qualities in her and my mother, but also certain associations and memories, and I tried to find ways to communicate some things. Maybe these things would never be picked up by anybody else, but that didn't matter. But it did provide that intensity of staring into the eyes of someone like that. Really produced something more than, as I say, just an illustration. And so I've been thinking about that, and I'm thinking about, that applies everywhere, really. That's not just that one occasion was, sort of dramatic for me, but it applies to painting and drawing and art making in general. And if you're working from a subject, if you're looking at the world, in other words, which you should be somehow for inspiration, um, it shouldn't, I don't think it should be purely an illustration you should be doing. Uh, if you're going out there to paint a landscape, you can set up an easel and paint and look at the trees and look at the grass and, either match that perfectly, or really, really closely. In other words, match the color of the sky, match the shape and the size of each tree. And that's a fantastic thing actually to do. There's something beautiful about that intensity of visual research. But I think we need to allow ourselves to go further. And when we're out there or when we're sitting looking at something and we're using it as a subject, allow yourself to look at it carefully visually, but Everything we look at in the world will have an association. Absolutely everything, I believe. If I set a cup up in front of me, if I reach over for the coffee cup and set it in front of me, it will have some association. Uh, and sometimes it's not easy to find what it is, but you can work at that, and for instance, there are objects that I've painted that have taken me to places, if you like, that I've remembered, or an event that's happened because I had an association with that object. And certainly in the case of landscape, I've been to places that have reminded me of experiences, and not only reminded me, but given me certain emotional sensations. It might be the sunlight, it might be the temperature on the day that takes you somewhere. And that might be to do with your memories, or it might be all sorts of things. But it happens. Sometimes we sort of let it fly past us while we're so busy looking for the illustration of what's in front of us. Because you see, what we often get in our heads is that we will be judged by the illustration. We will be judged. People will judge our painting by how well it looked, like the Moor Mountains or whatever it is. And that's a cultural thing that we have to be careful of. You're painting for yourself, and I think that is very important. And I know it almost sounds selfish, but I think if you want to really develop as a painter, you have to paint for yourself. Everything else will fall into place later on. People will either like it or they won't like it, or it'll turn out well or it'll just not turn out the way you wanted it to. That's going to happen anyway. That'll take care of itself. So why worry about that, all of those things, when you can be uh, in the place, in the moment, and express yourself? So when you're painting or drawing absolutely anything, as I said before, if I take this mug here, I mean, there's a flower on it. It's not my mug. I don't know. It's in the house, but I didn't go out and buy it or anything. It says happy and sad on it. And it's got flowers on one side, and all of those words and colors and things have associations. So if I let myself into that, I can make paintings that have another layer to them. It might encourage me. I might feel inclined to want to paint it brighter, or indeed I might be out painting somewhere out in the landscape, and it might be a bitterly cold day. Um, and it might still be sunny, but it might be bitterly cold. So it might be that I want to add something to do with the colors that tell me, at least, and maybe somebody else, about the nature of that place, beyond the fact that it was that height and that width and that color. And that's, for me, what makes art as opposed to purely illustration. I know illustration is a form of art, but what I mean is um, message art with a message, if you like. Art that has something that takes the viewer somewhere extra beyond just a picture. But that's not the responsibility purely of the viewer. It's up to you as the artist to guide that. Like a composer, a composer takes a theme of springtime, but they have to go and add a lot of other layers to create in the listener some emotion, that they're going to get, and that's not easy. Uh, so that's just my thought on that. When you're doing a portrait, if you're doing a portrait from a photograph, or anything, or you're drawing a still life, take time, stop for a little moment. You don't need to be drawing and painting constantly. Stop and look and get to know it. Look at it and let your mind drift. Let your mind drift to all the connections. Oh, that reminds me of this. That makes me think of so and so. I remember when I used to go to this place with that person. Maybe that person's no longer around. Or let all that happen, and then see if you can let at least some of it find its way into your painting too. I'm not suggesting that everyone's paintings have to be intense expressionist things with terrible. I'm just saying that you can add a little more life in a painting if you look for a little more life in the subject, if that makes sense. So that's about as much as I think I should say about that, but please have a think about it and try it.